have no responsibility for the current pandemic.
Stop lying!
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. This is Gigaohm Biological Testing, CQ, W3JJW Whiskey 3, Juliet Whiskey, calling CQDX. Looking to come out and get in contact with the world. I've been making a bold statement for quite some time. In fact, roughly 4 of them, they're on the screen now. So far, I haven't had anybody actually reach out and challenge me on this, certainly not to correct me, nor to congratulate for me for having finally distilled this narrative down to something that means anything to anyone that wants to hear it. This is not for everyone, but it is a message for anyone. Those words on the screen are not so difficult in combination to try to understand. They're a very easy coaching map to the goal. Welcome to the show. Fletch 808 is first in the chat, followed very, very quickly by Christy. Well done. The Thunder Cunder, I don't know really what that means, and if I have just said something naughty or whatever, I apologize for that. I'm not well versed in the trickery of chat folk names, if there is any. Good to see you guys there. The bold statement that I've been making, besides the 4 statements on the previous screen, are that these actors were put in place to curate a narrative about transfection, the damage it would be expected to cause, and that all this damage could be effectively blamed on a novel virus or the spike protein of it, colored in red here. And most of these people have been nearly instrumental in their own social media circles for perpetuating this narrative, making sure that no useful questioning of this skeleton of a mythology ever really resulted anywhere. And that has effectively brought us to where we are now.
There are people who have inspired a lot of thought for me, people like J.J. Cooey, who's regarded by some people as sort of this kind of savant or idiot or something whose ideas are just too terrible and too incompatible with the biology that they learned. And in many ways, they are.
And so what you see here is the very typical strategy that all of these state actors and the people in their orbit and service have done. They feign the attempt to recognize that they've learned something from me or heard something from me that they never knew before, that somehow maybe I might have a pretty good message, and taken it and obfuscated it, diluted it. Some people think his biology ideas are too crazy for the biology that they've learned or something like that, but don't ever say the very simple things that I say, that the known and expected damage from a mass rollout of transfection was obfuscated by 2 primary narrative themes. One, that the adenovirus was a legitimate attempt at trying to make a coronavirus vaccine that essentially failed because of a safety signal with clotting and I guess heart attacks or something. I don't know why people were dying from it. And so that was supposed to be evidence that the mRNA was better and safer. And then the other narrative, of course, is that the spike protein was the wrong choice of antigen. And so it doesn't even really matter whether you took Moderna or Pfizer, although there are some dosage differences and purity differences and formulation differences that people like Stephen Hatfield don't think are very important, because who cares what's really in the spike protein? The spike protein is bad. And we don't need to worry about what's in the spike protein of the virus that's currently circulating, that started circulating. Who cares? And whatever's in the shot, who cares? Just take their word for it that none of this could have been foreseen, that none of this could have been predicted. They knew nothing. It was just that's why Robert Malone took the shot, because he had long COVID and he wanted to travel. And so what what Nick Hudson does here is very cleverly suggest that the ideas that I'm putting forth are so complicated that only people in a very high group of thinkers is capable of evaluating them, and they're not even really thinking about it because his ideas are too controversial. What about these ideas is so controversial that people wouldn't be able to understand them? Maybe I'd have to change transfection to COVID vaccine for a few people so that they would understand that first, and then say that the COVID vaccine was actually a known technology, and that's why they had a whole list of probable outcomes already developed. And so this crew of narrative controllers, especially this row right here in the middle, these people are all that's required. Everybody else could just be a dupe, a go-getter, a want to be a part of the show kind of person, and doesn't really care that much as long as they get to go on the cruises that are off the coast of Turkey in 2022 that Robert Malone invites you to. And so America is under attack by biological mythologies. And so again, just like that, Nick Hudson is never going to tell the world that all of the useful ways that I've ever heard to talk about these illusions, I've heard through Jonathan Cooey. Everything from a spectacular commitment to lies is all that's required, to RNA cannot pandemic, to intramuscular injection has never been medicine. All of these ideas, when Nick Hudson ever even comes close to touching them, he's doing that only because of me. A guy who had me present 3 times for 2 hours each, especially with questions, to his Panda organization, but lost all of those videos. Just has Jessica Rose's videos and Jessica Hockett's videos and Jonathan Engler's videos and of course Marc Giraudo's videos. And so it's hard for Nick Hudson to really explain to anybody in a few seconds what Jonathan Cooey means by endemicity being a myth. That there's no biological evidence for a RNA molecule or a whole puddle of it going from nothing to everywhere in a course of a few months or a few years. There's no evidence at all. They're just lying about a background signal and trying to explain how it came into existence, and they have no evidence for it. And they're using that same mythology on a shorter time scale when they announced that they had a PCR test which could track a novel signal on this background, without ever informing you of how that would do that with only one set of primers and a probe. I mean, how could that ever be accomplished? Mark van Ranst of the WHO, the former flu commissioner of Belgium, should be questioned because there are talks of his in front of the Chatham House where he says we need a universal coronavirus test because they're so hard to detect to begin with. And yet, in the United States, by the end of 2020, we had over 220 EUA-granted forms of PCR testing in America that were sculpting this narrative about a novel virus that we needed to lock down for, that we needed to maybe grant a bunch of EUAs for other kinds of intramuscular injections, that we needed to test all of our college kids repeatedly. You know, those college kids that are all just happen to be enrolled in the same Epic databases. And yeah, all that stuff happened, and none of these people care. Because at the same time, a massive amount of this rollout of these shots was placebo, so that there weren't that many people falling down at CVS. There weren't that many people falling down at Walgreens. It's not like 14 people in a row were unable to leave a Walgreens in St. Louis in 2020 because the shot was so effective. That did happen supposedly on camera somewhere a couple times in Australia where somebody seemed to stroke out or something like that on camera. But I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, the easiest, most foolproof way to reduce the safety signal of any intramuscularly injected combination of substances would be to roll out a good percentage of placebo, of saline. I mean, it's a joke. And to think that these people wouldn't do it, but it's all for the money, it's just those two thoughts aren't congruent. And so we are still in 2025, and that's why the year is red here. we are still in 2025 using their tests to find their ghosts at all of our corporate hospitals. And that remnant stream is still being sold to the highest bidder, probably the United States government and other private entities that are trying to amass a data set that they can start to experiment on. A data set. Yes, a data set. How do we store genetic data and medical data from multiple human beings in a way so that a machine learning algorithm can usefully access that data in relatively high speed? They don't know how to construct a data structure like that. They don't know how to solve that problem yet. So first they got to collect all that data, and then they got to figure out how to organize it, and then they got to figure out how to shuffle that in. It's not the same as having an AI computer play Go against itself a million times and now they have a solution. This is a very important point to understand, that this whole finding their ghosts is still going on, and that is not just because you can make money selling tests. It's because you can generate a remnant stream. You can require a remnant stream to exist at any university that will enforce it. You can require a remnant stream to exist in any employer or any government that you want it, that wants to enforce it. And that remnant stream would then be available for the highest bidder, and very valuable potentially if it was coming from, I don't know, all the municipal employees of a state, or all maybe the military of a certain country or two. That's what's really going on here, because we have been fooled into accepting PCR as a high-resolution diagnostic for anything now. And the foreign invasion of our HHS through a Trojan horse named Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has effectively assured that the FDA will never change this. Never. So everybody shouting from the rooftops that, Carrie Mullis told us the truth, that is still the most relevant issue right now, in my humble opinion, as far as the mythology goes, because everything about public health is now going to be perpetuated via the PCR test, from flu to monkeypox to measles, all of it now. And the danger of that cannot be underestimated, because the FDA has just decided that gold standard basically needs no regulation anymore. And those companies don't mind. Those hospitals don't mind. So if they're just going to keep buying that stuff, and the FDA is just going to use it, these diagnostics shouldn't be used by themselves. They should be, combined with other diagnostic tools and techniques that are applied by the hospital. And so this remnant stream will go on, and people in the real world will go on believing that this is a diagnostic. They're getting information from it, when in reality, a remnant of their genetic data, their medical data, is being generated and probably sold. Potentially, this is all over the world. And our FDA would be responsible for it. The brand that everybody trusts. Even Marty McCary's grandfather overseas trusted the FDA brand. And so this is a controlled demolition of America, and it's a long, strange trip that this has been. How many of these people have come to my house or come to Pittsburgh to talk to me and then had conversations that just don't make any sense? Can you imagine that this poser came to Pittsburgh and hung out with me and a friend of mine for like 4.5 hours, and we never talked about the pandemic once? That's how much of a coward and a fake he is. He didn't even have the balls to try and manipulate me or play any cards or try to steer me back on narrative. That's how ridiculous he is. I think he knew it from the moment he met me, that this just wasn't going to happen. I mean, that guy was probably sent to my house by Robert Malone. And there are probably phone records and internet records that would prove it. Because Steve Kirsch tried to send me to Japan to work with that guy. I have text messages to prove that. And that guy has been on Steve Kirsch's podcast with the former research and development director of the Human Genome Project, Kevin McKernan, who I consider to be one of the worst Americans alive. I've met them all, I've talked to them all, and that's how I've come to the conclusion that there's a fake anti-vax movement in America because they are trying to enslave the grandchildren of Earth. They're trying to, especially the grandchildren of America, they want to be sure that this multiracial, highly heterogeneous gene pool is allowed to be adequately sampled before it is allowed to fizzle out. That's why they want to have probably been encouraging interracial marriage, not to ruin the white race, but to create as many Go games as possible that they could collect for their AI before they finally let everything fall apart and walked away. This is a very dark game that's being played here, ladies and gentlemen, with America and America's history and America's children. And unfortunately for them, I'm one of those kids who doesn't have any other identity but American. And I've spent enough time outside of America to know damn well what that means. I don't need to be white or brown or yellow. I'm a real American. I'm a multiracial, multi-ethnic human being from North America, and specifically from a region called Wisconsin. And no, I don't have any Native American blood that I know of, although my grandma has hinted at it. I don't think we do. So I got white people on one side, and my dad served in the Navy and bought some lady a hot dog and a Pepsi, or said, no, sorry, asked if she wanted a Pepsi with her hot dog at a swimming pool. And I was made in the Philippines, but born in the United States. So my dad served in the Navy, he did his time. He told me that if I was ever going to serve, I should serve as a pilot. And the Air Force would be the best because the Air Force always has a bed. My dad was a special ed teacher, so I know a lot about, how the word retarded used to be used. I was around a lot of mentally and physically handicapped kids when I was a kid. I remember very well the school that my dad taught at, having a very giant Winnie the Pooh at the end of the hallway and having a lot of cool games and stuff for kids to play, to work on their hand-eye coordination, stuff like that. And so I innocently went to college, tried to become a doctor, ended up being a biologist, ended up finding a new love in microscopy again, and photography again, and confocal microscopy. And then I learned how to record from neurons, and I was hooked. A combination of a microscope and a couple computers and a living brain slice was just like, are you kidding me? I can do this for the rest of my life. I don't mind, just pay my bills. I'll teach people to do it. And it made sense. It made sense because in that little experimental context, there was no ego, because you just knew that if you could get a connection between two neurons, you would have a physiological and handle on something that has some physiological relevance. Now, I'm not going to try and wax intellectual here very quickly about what I think an individual synapse means, or even 9 synapses between one cell to another, but that was what I was looking for. And it was a combination of photography and biology and even dissection, because the preparation of the brain slices is even a voodoo and an art that you can be really good at, or you can be very ham-fisted and be hopeless. And so there were all these card houses that you had to learn and become efficient at doing in order to get to the end goal, which was a repeatable experiment with a repeatable quality brain slice under a repeatable imaging, getting connections between neurons in a repeatable and reliable way. And that took a lot of dedication. The people that originally developed that technique won the Nobel Prize in 1991. And I actually trained with many of their postdocs, including Henry Markram of the Blue Brain Project in Switzerland. After that, and doing my PhD in the Netherlands, I met my wife, and we moved to Norway, and we had our children there. And while I was in Norway, I worked for who I think is still the most famous neuroanatomist from the Netherlands, a man by the name of Menno Witter. And he was working in collaboration with Maybrit and Edward Moser, who got the Nobel Prize in 2014, in conjunction with John O'Keefe in the UK for their discovery of place cells and grid cells in the hippocampus and their association with spatial memory. And so I was in the Netherlands 1 year out of my postdoc, having not realized at the time that the better choice might have been to try and get a position in Norway, because my wife wanted to move back to the Netherlands and raise our kids there. And I was all about that too. I liked the Netherlands a lot. And I liked her family a lot. I had learned Dutch, not Norwegian. And Norway is cold. Norway is dark. Norway is a place full of people that aren't very social to begin with. So then, if you don't, it's a lonely place, and we had a family, and that was okay. But she has a wonderful and vibrant family that, we're not anywhere near now, unfortunately. And it's the cause of a lot of heartache for her often. But, that was the whole idea of moving back to the Netherlands. And so my whole point is that I have put my whole being online here. I have hidden nothing, and I encourage people to try and check everything that I claim to be, and the track record or the timeline that I'm putting forth, because I don't put forth the idea that in 2020 I knew what was going on. And I think, thanks to my friend Mark Kulak, I think it's very obvious to me now that in 2020 and 2021 and in 2022, my existence forced a number of people to try to decide how to neutralize me. Was it going to be enough to keep me on the lab leak? Could they get me to play along with that? Or would I still be too much of a problem? Piper Stover, one of the things that she wanted me to do with that review was stop talking about the people and focus on the biology, because the biology would get me subscribers, not all the complaining about the people. And that's a very curious theme that has gone on throughout my experience with those people in that picture, is that they always want me to stop talking about the people, even though talking about the biology, I'm already done with that. It's too easy to explain that a background signal with a little bit of lying could be misconstrued as spread. It's starting to get too easy to remind people that this is a giant biological signal that they saw coming. And instead of telling you that we're going to have an overload of the hospitals for a few years because we have an overabundance of old people, and that this could be a problem for our budget, so we might want to, I don't know, we don't have to spare every expense in keeping them alive. And maybe we can do other things, and we can build other ways to take care of our aging population, because if we don't, why would they do that? When the other thing that this population pyramid predicts is that, and more importantly, and this is the thing to catch, the population pyramids around the Western world and in China all predict that this is the most abundant and genetically diverse human population that will be available in the coming centuries. And of course, these people think like that. This population pyramid is about to collapse, and this is probably not even the right numbers. And it's going to collapse in a way that will result in a lot of socioeconomic stress in the systems that are collapsing like this. And I assure you, there are other socioeconomic systems in the world, countries, that have a much worse pyramid than America. America's pyramid is shitty, but, it's not awful. China's is awful. Germany's, Scotland's. These places look disastrous. And they know that. They've seen that coming. And they've seen it coming because they are the ones who orchestrated this move from having big families to having little families to having none. The Chinese set the example for the whole world by saying, we find population such a problem that we're only going to have one child. I don't remember hearing anything about India doing anything about anything that they do with their population. It's interesting. Whereas I hear a lot of Americans, I've read a lot of books about from Americans saying that talking about the population bomb, figuring the population bomb The Population Bomb by Paul Ehrlich. I mean, I'm reading Figuring the Population Bomb by Carol McMahon. You can't really see that book right now. Building the Population Bomb by Emily Kancha Merchant. This one I haven't started yet. Somehow or another, I have the feeling that they've known that this was coming and they've known that they could take advantage of it. And one of the things that they were going to do to take advantage of it was spin this story about emergent viruses and about pandemics and about the need for a global surveillance system, a global network, global governance. And we have books from the 50s and the 60s and the 70s that have laid this groundwork. And a lot of these mentors that are currently in control, like Inder Vermer's mentor was David Baltimore. David Baltimore, the guy who claims he found reverse transcriptase. That guy, they're all the same people. It's almost like you have to start questioning how it's possible that Nancy Pelosi is still in front of a camera or a microphone talking about reality and trying to tell you to believe her. Why would David Baltimore be necessary? Why would Robert Malone be necessary? Why would these people like Tony Fauci be necessary? Because this is not truth. This is a narrative that needs certain red thread controllers to be present for a long, long time. Like, I don't know, Jay Bhattacharya being at Stanford since his undergrad. We're talking about a very malevolent operation because an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality was sculpted using murder and lies. One of the worst lies in America, which a lot of other Western countries, maybe Canada also has, is this opioid thing. So, and it's an anticipated rise. I showed this yesterday. I want to show it again. You can see it very clearly. This slope is rising, and that's from the phenomenon that you could see in the population pyramid in the previous slide. This bump in the population pyramid that's going up here. If you looked at all-cause mortality on a weekly basis over years, you would expect that all-cause mortality to go up. And if you look at Denny Rancourt's data, you can see it. But he says that that's not significant until the shot comes out. But of course,
stop lying.
That's ridiculous. If that was true, you wouldn't need 150 figures in every paper that he writes. That's probably the best way to see through his bullshit, is that he hasn't been able to distill his findings down to a couple pages or a news brief to save the world. He's got to give you a 100-page paper with 100 figures, and then he actually says that to you as if that's some kind of evidence of his sophistication, when in fact it's evidence of his obfuscation of simple biological signals which could be misconstrued as really complicated ones. It's an anticipated rise in all-cause mortality sculpted using murder and sophisticated lies. So first of all, we want to manage our old population, but that doesn't scare everybody. So we also needed a drop in life expectancy, a precipitous drop in life expectancy that, unfortunate for the United States, our NIH director is aware of, but can't do the math with regard to the, 250,000, 500,000, maybe 600,000 Americans that have died over the last 6 years from opioids as contributing, especially when they're mostly under 40, contributing to a decrease or even effectively causing a decrease in life expectancy in America and having no remainder. This math is hard, though. I mean, he's a Stanford professor. We can't expect him to be able to do everything. So, the other thing that I am really frustrated about is the use of supplementary oxygen incorrectly is just something that any doctor worth their salt, once they heard Mark or I say that, and then challenge themselves like a grown-up to go and Google or PubMed supplementary oxygen as being toxic and find out how many textbook chapters there are, find out how many papers were done in people or in ICUs as this being the primary way that people are injured in the ER and the ICU. So, and what does it result in? ARDS. And then realize that a very simple way to find a little justice and to reorganize our thinking on 2020 and 2021 would be to go through all those medical records that somebody hero like John Bodwin has been so good at looking at medical records, kind of, sort of, but not really, just at reports, VAERS reports or something. So again, I'm challenging individual doctors. I'm challenging individual people to pull their head out of their ass and realize that if I'm right about this, if Mark's right about this, then this will be one of the easiest signals to find. And any geographic region or hospital where this technique of getting people to develop COVID was employed, facility-wise, or facility-wide, then we have an alarm. And how many of those hospitals would we need to find? How many people like Grace Shara were at Ascension Hospital that were also given supplementary oxygen when they didn't need it, but then didn't get the other combinations of drugs that are called, intentionally euthanizing Grace, but were given a different combination of drugs like, I don't know, remdesivir, midazolam, or just not given antibiotics when they needed it. And I'm afraid that might be lost in the Grace Shara trial because, again, it's about what gets you started on the train. What can get people to believe that there's a disease? The only thing on this list that can get people to believe there's a disease is supplementary oxygen. If you're gonna ventilate somebody, I mean, of course you can and over ventilate them or use too high a settings to make sure that it doesn't spread. Yes, that's another way to do it. But ventilators is not sufficient to explain it. Why? Because a lot of times you're going to need an excuse to put somebody on a ventilator. Typically, you don't put a person on a ventilator until their lungs or their chest has been crushed in a car accident or something. You don't put people who can talk on a ventilator. And so the way you get people who can talk on a ventilator is to give them supplementary oxygen first until it hurts. And then when it hurts, you can tell them, well, maybe the pain would go away if we anesthetize you, put you under, put you on a ventilator, maybe that'll help. And this story so far is not going to be told. And I think that this story, this medical pathway, is exactly the reason why Jessica Hockett decided to pretend that she wasn't my friend anymore and that she doesn't know who I am anymore. But she's legit. Is because once you say this, then Pierre Corey's exposed. Her friend that she had multiple Substack discussions with about what happened in New York hospitals, and Pierre Corey had the opportunity to say to her audience that there was definitely COVID and stuff like that. These people are very close to being exposed. This whole show is close to being exposed to anybody who's willing to see it. It's not for everyone, but anyone can see it. Because all of these things happen, not just some of them, they're all confirmed. And when you do the math, that means there was no novel virus at all. There's no mystery virus needed at all. And that means that all of these people who've never been able to get there by one way or another have to be liars, especially if they're all attached to Robert Malone in India, for goodness sakes. If they're all attached to Steve Bannon in the UK, for goodness sakes. If they all have connections to something else that just doesn't make sense, then why are we paying attention to all of them so well and in such concert? You really have to think about how it is that we got here and how they got here. I am claiming to have known nothing in 2020 and gone from being a person who was a little alarmed when they gave my daughter a shot of vitamin K on her birthday to learning and figuring out that I had made a huge mistake and that I was making another huge mistake and that, oh my gosh, I was wrong about that too. Holy shit. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. isn't the guy I thought he was.
And then there are people who have inspired a lot of thought for me. People like J.J. Couey, who's regarded by some people as sort of this kind of savant or idiot or something that whose ideas are just too terrible and too incompatible with the biology that they learned. And in many ways, they are.
The scary part about it you have to see is that there are a lot of people on the internet who don't know who Robert Malone is. And now there's a trail on the internet that seems to appear that Robert Malone is a vaccine insider who spoke out about the mRNA. And he seems pretty reasonable. He's attractive with he's the most interesting guy I've seen on the internet in a long time. We are being set up for a disaster with Robert Malone being this volunteer emu farmer, horse breeder from West Virginia or Virginia who's I don't know, gonna save us, I guess, with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. He'll seem normal and he'll probably approve a few vaccines, and before you know it, it's like Robert Malone never left, right back in the saddle again. And as Steve Kirsch promised on the Stu Peters podcast, in 5 years, Bobby Kennedy is going to provide a safe vaccine schedule for America and the world. I just don't know about these ideas for an actuary like Nick Hudson, a guy who used to work for insurance companies, or somebody like retired pharma exec Jonathan Engler, now a lawyer, or I don't know, Dodd, or any of these geniuses. I don't know why the idea that the population pyramid had a signal is real complicated. I don't know why challenging the idea that RNA can just all by itself do a bunch of shit because it has a fear and cleavage site. I don't know why that's so hard to understand. I don't know why questioning intramuscular injection in general is a hard concept to fathom. And an easy concept. Why wouldn't it be an easy concept to debunk? And using the word transfection just doesn't seem to be possible for these people. And the reason why is that would make this not a novel technology with novel intellectual property. It would make this a old technology with known outcomes, expected outcomes, and huge limitations. Not that dissimilar to what they did to Jesse Gelsinger, they did to everybody with a hot dose. And why? Because it's for all the marbles. It's for the Human Genome Project. This is a 20-year plus national security operation that involved a lot of foreign actors, a lot of foreign collaborators. And now what you need to do as a viewer, as a person, as a citizen of Earth, as a citizen of your country, as a member of your family, you do really need to reflect on what you were doing in 2020 and what choices you made in 2020. And you need to reflect on what you really understand about the anti-vax health freedom movement, what you understand about the major players in it, and what motivated them and how they got there. You need to understand that in 2013, Brian Hooker did not use the word autism, didn't like the word autism, because that, to him, was a disingenuous way of saying that kids are neurologically damaged by intramuscular injection. And at that time, he had 16 years of experience working at a genetic laboratory for the U.S. government, transforming and transfecting plants. So Brian Hooker knows the word transfection. And when I worked for CHD as a staff scientist, he pretended not to know what the word meant. That's why I had to do a podcast with him and teach everybody what it meant.
Stop lying!
You would also have to know that Mary Holland was on opposite Paul Offit on Democracy Now! In 2015, saying that some component of the MMR injured her son. The exact story that Polly Tommy had in the UK that got her on 90 billboards in her bra swaying 60 million votes for the UK Prime Minister. Promoting a story by Andrew Wakefield, which we know is a lie and a hoax because we talked to one of the parents that he misrepresented in his original Lancet paper. You have to know when ICANN was put in and when the movie Vaxxed was put out. You have to know when Brandy got her first billboard. You have to know when CHD changed its name, the World Mercury Project was changed to Children's Health Defense. You have to know when Piper Stover was on a podcast with the former Indian ambassador talking all about biotech and how we're 5 to 7 years away from having artificial life. He'd have to see when James Lyons Weiler in 2019 was talking about how diseases that we can stop with vaccines are still circulating asymptomatically in the background. He'd have to be aware that Sam Harris predicted a pandemic where we wouldn't be able to tolerate anti-vaxxers in December of 2019. He'd have to be aware that Tony Bark died in March of 2020. You'd have to be aware that I was a professor at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine in the Washington Times, interviewed by what I think is a deep state agent, Bill Gertz, and quoted right underneath Tony Fauci about a lab leak. Then you'd have to know about the fact that Brandy Vaughn died in 2020 in December. And you'd have to know about all the other stuff. What other good things did you do? What decisions did you make while this murder was going on? Because I lost a 20-year career in neuroscience pursuing tenure in academia. I lost about $500,000 of equipment that I had arranged for myself in Pittsburgh for a guy that could never have floated that boat alone. I got him an R01 in the first year I was there with all the data that I collected. And I put it all on the line because I was sure they were covering something up. And then once I realized that they didn't have to be covering something up, they just had to be pretending they were covering something up, my whole world fell apart. And for a brief period of time, I thought it was coming back together because a guy by the name of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and a guy by the name of Senator Ron Johnson called me and told me they needed my help to right this ship, to figure it out. And now we're here in 2025, and I consider Senator Ron Johnson and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. part of the same Trojan horse that got a bunch of agents that seem to all be on a script provided by Robert Malone and Kevin McKernan into very key positions in the American government, and it's terrifying. The Trojan horse was headed by an American by the name of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who I at one point was fooled and thought that he was a good guy. Of course, I don't think that now. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a way out. There really is. There is a way out. That's all I got for you. There is a way out. We have to dismiss this Biology 101.
Actually, J.J. Couey's insistence, and I think he's right, on calling them transfections rather than vaccines. Actually, J.J. Couey's insistence, and I think he's right, on calling them transfections rather than vaccines.
What is this?
It's
6 years
literally
back, I asked
turning
one
into
question.
worst-case
I never
scenarios.
I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst-case scenario. I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst-case scenario. I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with
from where I'm sitting, there's a whole bunch of COVID
I'm afraid that the
going
latest
around.
data
It's remarkable because this scripted bullshit is misleading the young. It's misleading the young with foreign operatives. Of course, Z-Dog also did a scripted bullshit video about Robert Malone, making fun of him, but of course identifying him as a player, telling all of his audience that they needed to at least know who Robert Malone was and that he was speaking up ridiculously about the mRNA. Of course, now they can turn that around. He could even say, wow, I didn't think, I kind of also thought he was silly. You know, it's not that dissimilar to how Hasim Malhotra encouraged everybody to get it until apparently his dad died of it. And then he realized that, oh my gosh, in 2022, I've been wrong. And then got promoted by Brett Weinstein and by Robert Malone on stage in Stockholm. And now he's supposedly the Maha advisor.
Stop lying!
It's all one malevolent show. And so you've got UK Indians and UK Indians at the head of or advising the Maha movement. You've got this guy who's from the UK and I don't know what he is. You got this guy from India. You got this lady from India. You got Jay Bhattacharya. You got Inder Verma behind Robert Malone. I mean, Mark Kulak did a much better job this morning in like 15 minutes of explaining how ridiculous the situation is right now. That Robert Malone is at the ACIP and everybody's shouting that that's great. This is the transition from Robert Malone being a cat herder on our side to being a cat herder on national TV. You mark my word, this is going to get really ugly really fast because these people were put in place. These people were put in place to make sure that this narrative about a novel virus and a nasty spike protein would never go away, but in fact would be accepted by everyone as part of a mystery that was solved. That's the enactment that's here. A mystery that will be solved by this guy and this girl, and maybe even because he was such a good podcaster. And it will also be solved by Robert Malone and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And this is a very dangerous place we are in, but it is a scripted place. Scripted bullshitters on a bullshit script. And Kevin McKernan is one of the worst ones. This is a national security operation from day one. He's worked for the Department of Energy and had security clearance for almost his whole adult life. So, as I said in the beginning, PCR has been accepted as a diagnostic standard. Sequencing of viruses is also now accepted as a high-fidelity measurement that the vast majority of the population on Earth would never have the wherewithal to question. Intramuscular injection as a proven beyond question methodology, there are very few people on Earth that are questioning whether it's a good idea to put something in a needle and then use a very narrow cylinder of metal to inject something into our muscle tissue. RNA obviously has huge military potential, and I mean that seriously. You should accept that because they can make a lot of it. And RNA is a biologically active molecule like DNA is, and it could have a whole bunch of well-studied and therefore predictable effects, depending on how it's deployed. The absolute minimum and easiest explanation for the pandemic is that where they wanted to find the sequence, they put it there using synthetic DNA. If they wanted to sequence the Snohomish County man with the Wuhan 1 strain, they would just make that DNA molecule in a reasonable quantity and put it in him and then test for it. And they would get a razor-sharp, very bright, high-fidelity signal, making it seem as though sequencing is a high-fidelity measurement. And they could perform that trick anywhere they wanted to, in any hospital they wanted to, with an amount of material that would be smaller than a Visine water dropper. And only one drop would be required if it was prepared correctly. That also means that if they had an active transfection component and wanted to poison somebody with it, that would be relatively trivial to put in somebody's food. It would probably be relatively tasteless because it could be suspended in pure water. It also can be put in alcohol, which makes it very easy to put in somebody's drink. Solving America's health problems will be complicated, that is for sure, but it's mostly because these people have no intention of doing it. They have intention of collecting your data. And so we're always supposed to believe that having him as a Health and Human Services Secretary is already a huge win. And so if we had to accept some of the shithead antics of Donald Trump, at least we got RFK at HHS, and the important things about our broken system are going to change. And so again, I would say the same thing. If they were sequencing for a certain protein or a certain RNA, and it was the spike protein or it was the N protein, that is the only construct that they would need to seed wherever they wanted to find it, right? Only if they intend to fool somebody about finding the full sequence do they need to put the full sequence there. If they know ahead of time that they're going to test Snohomish County man with the N protein and the spike protein, then that's two RNA or DNA sequences that could be prepared by very standard means. They probably could be even ordered. And then you could just put him on him and then give it to a technician and say, hey, test this. And it would come up bright and they would say, I guess he's positive. Wow. That's the extent to the spectacular commitment to lies that would be required. That's it. It's the simplicity of it. It's how easy it is. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that if the background signal is irreducibly complex like Nathan Wolfe said it was. And so you really have a political stunt that has been combined with a national security operation. And you have a guy going around the world telling people that they'll never figure it out because it's a psyop. You have a guy going around the world saying that the FDA screwed up because there was DNA in the shot. Who's always known that the FDA would be in the way of the future progression of the Human Genome Project that he himself helped set in motion and helped, provide a vision for, or at least is aware of the long-term vision that it represents. And of course, one of the magnificent psyops of the Human Genome Project is that a long, long time ago already, we sequenced a whole human or 3 of them, and now we do it every day for peanuts. And it becomes cheaper and cheaper every day. This is the kind of thing that this guy says constantly, that this guy will parrot constantly, and this IP expert probably knows is bullshit. And so the truth of the matter is I don't think Trump was shot. I think that was a demonstration of the power of social media, because I do think that the Democrats have no idea. I don't think that the Biden administration or a lot of those people are aware that Donald Trump's shooting was faked. I think that there is a certain group of people that knows it was fake. But keep in mind that a well-placed pellet gun or a Secret Service guard with a razor blade on his or her finger or nail could have put Trump down in such a way to cause the blood. That stunt is a joke. The high school where Matthew Crooks supposedly went, their graduation is tonight. My son is going to play in the band for the pomp and circumstance and stuff like that. And we don't know anything about the kid, his family, his social media history. Nobody gives a shit, even though apparently he almost killed the now president of the United States. But the mystery was solved, right? The mystery was solved. I mean, we know it for sure. Donald Trump was definitely shot. And in fact, Brett Weinstein and John Cullen and Chris Martenson and a bunch of other people that only our side of the coin sees were very interested in how many other shooters were involved, because there were all these other noises and ricochets. And some of these videos show a guy in a golf cart talking about shooters. So this is a distraction. RFK being there is a distraction. It's supposed to be a way for Mary Holland to tell you that, well, it's a political game now. I mean, we've got our man in there now. Now we've got to trust Bobby that he's going to do it. 5D chess shit. It's not on the agenda, ladies and gentlemen. They want your grandchildren. And the best way that you can see the incompetence of the Trump administration is to realize they didn't submit a budget, even with 4 years of planning. It's really a scary place where the United States is. We really need help. We need help badly.
On every slide, the first slide, I have quotes, and I know that you don't read them at all because you don't need to read them to pass or get a good grade. But this one is pretty cool. The quote from Alice in Wonderland: "One can't believe impossible things," said Alice. "I dare say you haven't had much practice," said the Queen. "Why, sometimes I've believed as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." So that's totally suitable for this lecture. A lot of impossible things are going to happen today.
The masks, or behind, proper testing, or behind the 6-foot distancing, the 2-meter distancing, or behind these shots, right? This technology that had never been used widely. None of that is over. And as Sasha Latifa pointed out this morning, these were military operations, but they were global military operations, right? Every country had exactly the same narrative. I was fortunate to be able to travel during COVID because I had natural immunity, having had it for 2 days. I took ivermectin. conversation. I was fine. And so I saw, 2 meters, masks, be afraid, stay at home, lock down, schools closed, businesses tanked. All of that was on a global basis.
But you can tell if someone's lying, you can sort of feel it in people. And I have lied. I'm sure I'll lie again. I don't want to lie. I don't think I'm a liar. I try not to be a liar. I don't want to be a liar. I think it's like really important not to be a liar.
A condition that we will not call autism. I don't like the word autism. He was vaccine damaged. He was neurologically damaged. A condition that we will not call autism. I don't like the word autism. He was vaccine damaged. He was neurologically damaged.
But you can tell if someone's lying, you can sort of feel it in people. And I have lied. I'm sure I'll lie again. I don't want to lie. I don't think I'm a liar. I try not to be a liar. I don't want to be a liar. I think it's like really important not to be a liar.
What is this?
It's
6 years back, I asked one question.
I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst case scenario. I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst case scenario. I'm afraid that
we could call them peasants or poor people, or they're jungle people coming out of native cultures that haven't had the benefit of a Western education. Choosing my words, so they would have these vaccine campaigns for yellow fever. These people would go get their yellow fever shot, and then they would say, well, if one is good, 2 is better. They get back in line.
Wow.
And they get another shot and kill them. Okay? That's the nature of these hotter, live attenuated vaccines, is it's just a question, like everything, of getting the dose right.
It doesn't matter much at all what you believe about vaccines until we invent really important ones, until we have a pandemic that's killing everyone, and, it's measles plus, okay, I can tolerate what you think about measles because, not that many people die from it. It's just a big hassle in the end. But no, when we have this new pandemic that is, got 75% mortality and, there'll be no pretense of being polite in the face of these beliefs. It'll be a moral emergency because it has to be.
Concerned. But one thing I am confident of from everything I've read is that this RNA exists. You can capture it, you can sequence it, you can move it to other cells and recapitulate disease.
I don't care how you get there. I don't care what you do to get there. The goal is to win.
What time is it? Game time! Woo!
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the show. This is Gigaohm Biological, a high-resistance, low-noise information brief brought to you by a biologist. I'm going to apologize to my longtime viewers for having used almost an hour for that introduction. However, I think at this stage, the repetition is so necessary because Robert Malone has just been promoted to the ACIP, and I think this is the moment to again awaken everybody to the role that he played in laying this narrative and extending the time, getting us running in these hamster wheels, and he is one of the more malevolent players in this narrative. And the only reason why we know of him, is because we were on social media running in their hamster wheels. So I think ultimately our goal has to be to get off of social media, to recreate it.
Condition that we will not call autism.
Brian,
I don't like the word autism.
Brian,
he was vaccine damaged.
I know, Brian. Autism spectrum disorder is a myth, and it's a myth that's used to make sure intramuscular injection is never questioned as a methodology. that virology is never questioned as a science, and that public health is never questioned as a reason. And they did the same thing in a military style with pandemics and gain of function over the last 5 years. We cannot teach this to our children, or they will be enslaved by this mythology. We need to understand why the cheese is free on social media. We got to get out of that trap while we can. The illusion of high fidelity biology and understanding of who we are and where we're going is it really is something that we cannot pass on to our kids. It's our responsibility to learn this biology and pass on the truth to our children. I really think that this is the game, ladies and gentlemen. This is the most important game right now. There is no more important thing to do than to make sure that the history of these people is not lost, especially the Americans and their collaborators on X that really orchestrated this from the very beginning. If you are here for a while, you are here at the top of the wave. If not, you might be a skilled social media user that needs to be coached into staying focused on the biology, shown how not to take the bait on social media. That means logging off and loving your neighbor, and that's definitely not your followers. Even though I do consider a lot of my followers my friends, my neighbors are different people. Ladies and gentlemen, the voice that you hear is that of Jonathan J. Cooey. I'm Chief Biologist at Gigaohm Biological. I come to you live out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the back of my garage. I am the former scientific advisor behind the Wuhan cover-up book for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I worked for him for about a year and a half before I was employed as a staff scientist by Children's Health Defense under Brian Hooker and Mary Holland, who later fired me for discussing Robert Malone on my podcast. Actually, the same guy that the now head of the NIH, Stanford professor Jay Bhattacharya, asked me a couple times to stop talking about Robert Malone too. And incidentally, now he has a government post in a volunteer capacity in HHS as an ACIP member, and everybody's really excited about it. But I'm not, because I'm afraid what they're going to do is use Robert Malone on people who don't know him yet. Use Robert Malone on people who have no idea who he is and bait them in the same way they baited us, play them in the same way they played us. But in this case, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Robert Malone are going to be the hard pill that everybody's willing to swallow. And they're going to provide safe vaccines and even maybe admit that the coronavirus vaccines were contaminated, and maybe even make Robert Malone a hero for having stepped up to say it so early in 2021. And tell us that he had taken it and it solved his long COVID or something like that. Ladies and gentlemen, please go to gigaohmbiological.com and find a way to support this work. We are running on fumes right now. It's about 110 people, even if you count the 3 or 4 people that give us a larger donation every month. Most people are only giving $10, and so that adds up to very little. And we are definitely not getting rich. In fact, our credit card companies are getting rich. And if you're not watching me, you should be watching Housatonic live on HughesatonicITS.com, on YouTube, Twitch, Rumble, Odyssey. He's everywhere. I usually find him on Twitch. He's part of the now growing independent bright web of people who are just trying to fight for the truth. And in this case, this is the American version of the independent bright web. Mark and I are two multiracial Americans that have no allegiances and no other passports. My wife is Dutch, her family's Dutch. I love them very much, but we're not moving to Holland unless America gets nuked. Ladies and gentlemen, there were a team of performers on the internet, and they were all in the same script, hundreds of them. Some of them paid, some of them not, some of them just given fame and fortune. But this thought experiment should help you understand what they did, because no matter where you went on the internet, you know, writing a Substack, posting on X, what you were really doing when they invited you to help was they invited you to help this guy. They were doing this act with a pandemic that they always knew what it was. It was a population pyramid signal that they were going to pretend to interact with, to pretend to understand, maybe even make lots of graphs about or something like that. Ladies and gentlemen, two of the most ridiculous parodies on the internet now are this content and track record of this account Gigaohm and its love dance with Kevin McKernan's account on X. Now I would be willing to bet dollars to donuts that Kevin McKernan himself isn't typing all of these things simply because he's got better things to do. but he's probably getting a compensation for having his likeness used on these platforms, and like a lot of these other people are being compensated for. So I'm going to just say it one more time. Most of the people at the top row have been so worked over by the people underneath them that they can't possibly understand what's going on. And the only one who seems to understand that I get it is Tom Binder. And Thomas Binder has regularly promoted me on X, regularly said that we're one of the two people that get it. Sukrit Bhakti has said that we shouldn't talk about RNA cannot pandemic. If we already know that's true, then we should just stop talking about it, which is, of course, ridiculous. And I do think Wolfgang Wodach also knows that I'm the man, so to speak. And I don't want to say it like that, except to say that you got to, at some point, it's got to be okay when you know it's true. There's no one else on the internet besides Mark and I right now, and maybe Joe Marshall. There's no one else. Everybody else, just like cable TV, you don't have a bunch of random guys, in their basement making, what was that? I just couldn't think of it in time. They were from Saturday Night Live, and one had a long blonde hair, and the other one was Mike Myers, and they were in the basement, and they were rock stars, and it was a cable TV show, and I can't remember. Wayne's World, thank you very much. I mean, there are no Wayne's Worlds on the internet. You're not going to find a podcast that doesn't have a staff. You're not going to find a podcast that isn't making money. The podcast of a CEO has a 50-member staff. They make more than a couple $1 million a year. And so YouTube has a vested interest in supporting them. YouTube has a vested interest in not supporting people like us. And so that's why we're working on this PeerTube thing, trying to build it more robustly so that, if worst case scenario happens, we can just stream on YouTube or on PeerTube all the time. And as long as you, just genuinely share the link, then more and more people will see that this is happening. And that there is a parsimonious explanation for how we got here, and that this is a very significant statement to make with these pictures here, in light of the fact that, for example, Robert Malone apparently sued the Bregans for $25 million because they misattributed mass psychosis or said something bad about my use of the term mass psychosis. So I'm going to sue them for $25 million. Robert Malone's never sued me. CHD's fired me. But Robert Malone's never bothered to sue me for calling him a traitor to American grandkids. He's never bothered to sue Housatonic Live, Mark Kulak in Boston, for his exquisite web exposure of him on his own website that links him to all these people really nicely. You can just keep clicking and find it and follow it. It's just, alphabetical. I don't know if you can say the alphabet or not, but Malone ends in M. I mean, this is a joke to me at this point that no one sees this. This is only possible because of our acquiescence to and our inability to actually skillfully use the internet. Because I have to admit, even my own followers that are there, you have to just assess it, right? Gigaohm Biological has not been able to get out in 5 years. We still have less than 4,000 followers on Twitch. We still have less than 13,900 followers on Twitter for like the last 3 years. And so none of the expansion with Jeff from Earth, we've tried to put an Instagram out. Fearless been working on a Gigaohm Biological Instagram, but it's not growing. And so I am just as ineffective as you are at getting the word out. And I may be worse because I'm trying. And so we have to acknowledge together as a group that we need to change our strategy, that streaming on 4 platforms at the same time and hoping that people will share the work or tweet about it or something like that, we're not getting anywhere. We have to find a new way together to push this farther. And I'm sorry to say it, but that means that a lot of us have to become more effective, not just me. I've been working for 5 years on this, and that's why the presentation is as good as it is, why I don't need notes, why I can talk about this from any angle, and why my longtime collaboration with Mark Kulak has made it possible for me to really fill in a history that looks ugly, and makes Glenn Beck look like a joke, and the timeline of Glenn Beck like a joke. And just to make sure that you know that there are other researchers or analysts or coaches out there that say Vikel Corporation, Mark Kulak. I also say Vikel Corporation. Oh, really? Hold on one second. Let me fix that.
Mainstream scientists say it's not true, but a small and growing body of studies points to a potential COVID vaccine link to cancer. One of the lead researchers on the topic is Kevin McKernan, known for his work on the Human Genome Project. He says the problem may arise from unexpected genetic material, DNA, discovered in COVID vaccines and in patients' bodies long after the shots. So DNA is an information storage system.
Yes.
And it also is an application that can tell things to happen in your body?
Yes, so it can instruct your cells to make certain proteins.
Now I'm just going to sample or just start here by saying my hypothesis, my prediction as the only true biological Nostradamus on Earth right now. My prediction in this theater is that they are going to use a combination of Robert Malone and Kevin McKernan to slowly roll them out into audiences on social media that heretofore do not know who they are. And of course, understand, right? You understand that, right? That if social media is represented on a computer in 4 or 3 dimensions, there will be groups of people over here that are fighting about these ideas, and then there'll be some intersection with another group, and then there'll be groups over here who don't give a shit about any of that. And they have spent a long time making these cognitive maps of different groups of people, and they've done experiments that we know of and that we don't know of, changing the messaging over here to see if that echoes over here or vice versa. These games have been played for a very long time. These games have been optimized as the programs and the software suites have been optimized. That's the exact reason, for example, why Twitter originally started with 140 characters and now they've made it bigger, because at the beginning, the way that they could map thought and the way that ideas moved through groups of people required that the ideas necessarily be smaller, so that the machine learning algorithms could be trained on a manageable data set. Now that they've been trained on that size of a data set, they can increase the size of it. Very much in the same way that they started with chess and then they moved on to Go. They didn't do Go first and then chess. It's all the same basic logic here and all the same basic brute force tactics that are being applied. It's just that we don't have we can't step back far enough to take a long enough time horizon to see what they've accomplished over the last 15 or 20 years, as they've waited until 2020 to force us all on social media and to switch over to almost exclusively using social media to get our information and to interact with our friends and family. Which is really why this is such a disaster, because all of the relationships that we have now are potentially falsifiable. All of the relationships that we have now are potentially distortable. And the worst part is all the relationships that we have are potentially monitorable. And so this guy is not a former Human Genome Project guy. He's a current operative in the role of seeding a narrative about a contamination in the shot that could be causing cancer, and that contamination will be covered up, it's blah, blah, blah. And so we're going around the elephant in the room, which is that transfection was always a crime. We're not even going to use the word transfection here. We're starting with DNA, for shit's sake.
It can instruct your cells to grow uncontrollably.
Oftentimes cancers are a genetic aberration that occurs, a mutation of some sort. So you don't want to be bombarding your genome with random mutations. And that's our fear of what could be going on with these vaccines, that the moment you start including DNA in these vaccines, particularly DNA that has sequences that instruct it to go to the nucleus and make a change.
So the main narrative that they will seed, that Robert Malone will seed, that the rush to manufacture these things using standard recombinant techniques was just the wrong idea. And because they made the RNA using recombinant DNA techniques, there's all kinds of contamination in there because there is no way to purify RNA from DNA in a mass scale. The only way to do it will be to take a small amount of pure DNA and, no, sorry, that's not even true. The only way that they're going to do it in the end is print it. And printing RNA is something we can do a show on so you can understand what they're doing. But basically, you can make a very pure concentration of RNA to a certain limited length by essentially printing it. So what you do is you have this tray of binding places that are electrified or chemically, like created, and then you wash a base over that, and that first base sticks to that root, and then you wash all that base out, and then you put a new base in, and then you cause it to bind to the first base, and that's like 100% the same. Then you rinse all the excess base out and you put your next base in, and then you do the chemical change that causes the bond to occur, and then you rinse all that base out, then you put the next base in, you change the chemicals to cause the bonding to occur, and then once all those are bonded, then you rinse them off again, and after that reiterates, you can go base by base by base and build your small RNA. So that technology, of course, is only useful on an individual basis, which is, of course, what we just looked at yesterday, the FDA clowns are advocating for.
You're running the risk of the vaccines causing cancer.
The RNA vaccines, the RNA part of it was supposed to give a temporary instruction to your body?
Yes.
And it's not doing that?
And they told you to last, 48 hours? Right? And now the papers that have come out are showing detection out to 60 days from the Roltgen paper. We have the Krausen paper showing it out in 30 days in the heart tissue. People are finding it in placentas. People are finding it in breast milk. People are finding it in plasma 28 days later. So there's this persistence problem that...
So there's this persistence problem. And the thing about it is that you need to see that what makes this guy one of the worst Americans alive is that what he wants you to believe here is that he couldn't have told everyone on Earth this in 2020. This guy with patents and spin-off companies and a dad who worked on microarrays and brothers who have cancer companies, he could not have predicted or saw that transfection using an RNA produced by techniques and manufacturing processes that he probably had a role in developing in one way or another, or had a role in robotizing, automating, because that's what a lot of his work in the Human Genome Project was how to automate it, how to apply robotics to these things. Not that dissimilar to the IP that, like somebody like Peter Cullis has for special processes for preparing special concoctions of lipid nanoparticles that are so mysterious that even Robert Malone believed they work. This is a very malevolent future that is coming for America, but we can actually get in front of it. And I'm getting in front of it right now because they are going to do this, and I am telling you before they're doing it. They are going to be on The View. They're going to be on Joe Rogan. They're going to be on major platforms like Tucker Carlson, telling everybody this, and eventually it's going to leak out to the other side, and holy shit, Robert Malone, the most interesting man in the world, probably recruited by Inder Verma all the way back then, or at least as a link for the Human Genome Project and its international collaboration with the intelligence of India. Maybe it's a quick pro quo. Maybe it's this round they get to have a bunch of people at the FDA and the NIH as payback for all their cooperation. I don't know. Maybe Robert Malone works for them. I don't know. It's not my job to figure that out because this is a crime. But I assure you, Robert Malone is not who Robert Kennedy says he is, because Robert Kennedy is on a script provided by Robert Malone. Jay Bhattacharya is not a normal guy. He's on a script provided by Robert Malone. Vinay Prasad is just an absolute gunner who is doing what he's told. Marty McCary is on a script provided by Robert Malone. And until somebody else uses Robert Malone's name in the correct way by associating him with Vikel, Indian CEO, and with Epivax, Dutch lady looking for super antigens, and with David Hone, who used to surf on his couch, and Sina Bavari at US Amrid, the guy who wrote the paper about remdesivir, the domain server and finding remdesivir and saying that it would work along with famotidine and ivermectin and celecoxib, that if ivermectin and celecoxib could be forced on everybody for 60 days, the pandemic would be over, according to Steve Kirsch and Brett Weinstein, whose brother is an advisor to Peter Thiel's Capital Company and whose dad was responsible for the modernization of the FDA, despite Estes Kefauver's best effort to do it better. It looks like Brett Weinstein's dad and Robert F. Kennedy's dad conspired to sort of neutralize whatever Estes Kefauver wanted to accomplish. And then Estes Kefauver just dropped dead in the Senate 3 weeks before John F. Kennedy was murdered. This man is one of the worst liars and posers in America right now. And the appearance that he did on the Danny Jones podcast is probably the equivalent of criminal evidence, in the sense that he's lying in a way that has adversely affected my ability to make a living and my ability to represent my professional past. Because whereas I'm the one who was a official scientific advisor for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for a year and a half, Charles Rixey was fired for violation of a wow, why can't I think of it? But you're not supposed to share a book that you're working on as an editor with people that are not signed the non-disclosure agreement. And yet he brought into the meeting Kevin McCairn, the guy that this dude was on Steve Kirsch's podcast, kind of rehearsing the whole narrative about how it's going to be about DNA, but it's also going to be about amyloid and about clotting and all this other stuff. When, remember, transfection by lipid nanoparticle in general before the pandemic was known to go to two places, the liver and platelets. And so an autoimmune reaction to platelets might lead to massive whole systemic clotting. It could lead to endothelial autoimmunity, which could also result in clotting and other, kinds of terrible outcomes that have been blamed on the spike protein. And this man is central to maintaining the narrative, and he's been practicing on us for 5 years, and now they're about to cross him and Robert Malone over to mainstream.
No one seems to understand or predict.
So something is staying in your body that is continuing, presumably, to give instructions
Making
far
spike
beyond
protein.
what we thought.
Yes.
Make spike protein.
Right.
So what should people be concerned about with what you found? If someone's had COVID vaccines, what would be their concern?
I would keep an eye on if any of your family members come down with an unexplained cancer, get a pathologist involved to get a slide or a sample so that the people who are studying this can begin to look for whether there's vaccine sequence in there. So we have a person who had 4 Pfizer vaccines, and then a year after that came down with a colon cancer, and there were 3 biopsies taken, 2 before death and 1 after. The person died of this diagnosis within 30 days. Those samples were then, we used a tool called PCR to look for the Pfizer's vaccine sequence, and then resorted to a process known as voluminous sequencing to sequence the tissue to see if there's any Pfizer sequence in there, and there is.
So Illumina sequencing can do the whole sequence of the whole genome, and then they're looking for the sequence in the whole genome. That's the story he's telling you. And so you have to accept it. He used to work for the Human Genome Project. Illumina sequencing does the whole genome. Interesting that those were the machines that were used in California on all the cops and municipal employees that I'm currently serving as expert witness in the trial under appeal. They had huge Illumina sequencers to do a 1 primer pair PCR test. He just told you it's PCR. They use PCR. It's a high fidelity diagnostic. It's a high fidelity measurement. So is sequencing. They can sequence that guy's whole genome. I wonder what would happen. If we took and sequenced the chunk that came out of my throat that's in this tube right here. I wonder if we sequenced this little mushroom-shaped dehydrated thing there, if we'd find anything, if he could Illumina sequence that and see if there's any SV40 in it. Because that ain't a burn from smoking, I'll tell you that much. It's something else. It almost suffocated me.
Shockingly, there's a lot of it, and that was not expected. And the only way that happens is if it got into the cells and amplified and started replicating.
Does it imply that it caused the cancer, or just the fact that it was present in the cancer is concerning?
The fact is, yes, it's a good question. We can't nail causality from the data we have, but it is certainly a concern when you see a sequence like that. So there are mechanisms where this could be playing a role in cancer. So the reason we'd like to get this message out is that I think too many of these tumor biopsies are getting thrown away and the evidence is disappearing. And it's important for folks going through that process to try to retain the biopsies if they can, so that we...
Because that's experimental data. Because it's potential experimental data that if you know why it's there, you know what it's a result of, and you can get the actual medical records for these people. Holy cow, what a added bonus for rolling out transfection.
You can go back and see if this is in fact the case.
And what are you all cumulatively learning or expect to learn in the coming year or two about all of this?
Well, we want to understand how long does this stuff last in patients, because this DNA was not consented to, we didn't expect it, so now there's a new question of how long does it last. We've already seen papers come out showing that they can detect nucleic acid in placentas, and there was vaccine nucleic acid in those. So these mothers, unfortunately, I believe, were...
So nucleic acid is being very imprecise. Is that DNA or is that RNA? You see, because that's also tricky. Was it single-stranded DNA or double-stranded RNA? What's he looking for? How's he finding it? It's a lot of hand-waving here that you have to assume that he's a genuine, objective, real expert, and he's actually a Department of Energy college dropout, long-time Francis Collins acolyte, Mark Lander acolyte, MIT, you know where that Retzif guy who also got appointed is from, where Stephanie Seneff is also from, where Steve Kirsch also went, where Rodney Mullen is also a faculty member at the Media Lab at MIT.
Force vaccinated for the birthing center. So we don't really know how long it lasts in placenta. And if it's in placenta, it's probably getting into the newborn. So there's an ongoing question in the whole field of where is this vaccine going, how long is it lasting, and what is its contribution to disease? And we have to track the molecules of DNA and RNA to sort that out.
Are you surprised if the government isn't doing this kind of tracking? Because it would seem a natural thing that they'd want to have to answer.
Well, that would be...
Why did they look for the sequence that they looked for? Why did they look for SV40? It's because, according to Kevin, he found it in the original Pfizer sequence having been erased, but when they put the Pfizer sequence through the database identified the SV40. And SV40 is probably the most ubiquitously used construct to drive replication and expression. I think it's to drive replication in bacterial culture in academia. Anybody that's making a large quantity of DNA and using recombinant means is probably using SV40 in their lab. So the idea that this signal is present somewhere and it's exclusively the domain of a Pfizer injection is the most absurd declaration ever. And the fact that he doesn't explain that this is a very commonly used sequence and commonly used for decades.
That would be a normal consideration, but in the peak of the pandemic, there was an enormous amount of revenue coming in to our government agencies, which leads me to believe they were not motivated to look for hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin or alternative tools that might treat.
Wow, think about how lame that is. The alternative tools to treat. If you can't see how awful this is, but more importantly, that this is not aimed at me. This is not aimed at you. This guy was on my stream at the end of 2021. 3 weeks before Charles Rixey came to my house and I started to grow something on my throat that would last a year and a half. This guy could have told us this in 2020 if he wanted to. He could have said this all on my stream if he wanted to, but he didn't. He talked about the RNA being impure, which he's not talking about anymore at all.
Coronavirus, they wanted the vaccine to be the only solution because that's what lined their pockets.
Many establishment scientific authorities acknowledge the DNA discovered in COVID vaccines, but they say the amounts are too low to pose a risk.
We're in a big trouble, ladies and gentlemen, because they're lying to us.
Basically just the sluggishness of government in general. And in my mind, how do we use this situation to our advantage to make sure that people are getting I think there's a genuine call for justice to be called for.
We need a call for justice, says this liar in Japan in collaboration with Addy Ads, a close associate of George Webb who's even got a book with George Webb. Look on Amazon. This guy and this guy streamed with me for 5 weeks straight in March of 2020. This guy's been to Pittsburgh to visit me last year. This guy's been to Pittsburgh to visit me in 2022. They come to visit you?
Especially if there was a moratorium in place that caused Fauci's department to have the research offshored.
There's no way that this is possible. That in 2020, with a George Webb associate, he's speculating about Tony Fauci avoiding Obama's ban and outsourcing the gain of function work to Wuhan. The same shit that people believe now, 6 years later. This clown was scripted from day one.
Okay, so I mean, I have to presume that somewhere.
Look at him. He's going to be reading, and then he's going to catch up to the script and laugh about having to wait.
Because we don't know what those papers look like prior to the, and this was the Obama administration that did this, and there's a strong argument for. Oh, I've got. Wait.
Keep going, Kevin.
Yeah. So I have to presume that some.
Ralph Barick's the guy who arguably taught Wiv how to create the coronavirus.
Taught who?
The Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Oh.
So there were grants that Fauci basically boomeranged off of EcoHealth into the WIV because they put a gain of function ban on funding here in the States.
Right. Obama did that, right?
Obama did that. And so
Obama did that, right? Yeah. It's a script. Even Danny Jones is on a script a little bit. He knows where they're going to talk about, what they're going to talk about. And the fact that this guy in the Danny Jones podcast mentioned Charles Rixey as a primary source and whistleblower, a Marine like a dog on a bone on this, makes this man a traitor to America, a traitor to our grandkids, and very specifically a traitor to me and my family, because he's misrepresenting Rixey as me and claiming that Rixey released the diffuse proposal. The diffuse proposal is part of this narrative control. It is a stunt that they tried to get me to go along with by using drastic and by sending Charles Rixty to my house 3 weeks after this guy allowed me to interview him in 2021.
So what Fauci's creative way around that was, well, we'll fund a nonprofit called Echo Health Alliance, run by Peter Daszak, who will launder the money for us into the Wuhan.
5 years later, they are also on a Steve Kirsch podcast. The other thing to realize is that Kevin McCairn connects Robert Malone and Steve Kirsch and this fake health freedom movement, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Mary Holland, directly to Andrew Kaufman and Mark Bailey and Tom Cowan, because they performed together. They performed together on the Street MD. They performed together. Kevin McCairn and Mark Bailey performed together after Kevin McCairn called his wife a whore for 2.5 years. Tom Cowan had a book in 2018 from Chelsea Green Publishing about something to do with vaccines, but he hasn't been able to make any progress since he had that book. He just knows he likes chickens. And so none of these people on the screen will even mention Robert Malone's name, even now, as he will be elevated. They can't come up with the conclusion that maybe there was an elaborate hoax. Maybe they just murdered a bunch of people in America. But once you realize that it's either American traitors or foreigners, why would they care if a few people got murdered in America? Why do they care if opioids kill a few thousand Americans? What do they give a shit? They've got a book deal. They've got a hugely successful YouTube channel. He's hoping to get a book deal soon. This guy's got books. This guy's charging $1,500 an hour. I bet you she's got a book coming about all her FOIAs. Give me a break.
It's literally turning into worst case scenario. I'm afraid that the latest data tells us that we're dealing with essentially a worst case scenario.
Now, it's not that part of it that I'm trying to call your attention to. What I'm trying to call your attention to is the illusion that they create when they put people out on the internet that steer you toward one of two directions. They either steer you toward no virus at all, not usefully questioning the narrative, not understanding the biology that they could use to create the illusion, not understand the exaggerations that could be, but just very simply, there are no viruses at all. And that isolation, purification, and culturing are the primary things you need to learn. Or it's a bioweapon. That's it. Those are the two choices on this screen. And these people interacted with each other in order to sustain that narrative, to steer me toward one of those two directions and you and everybody else on Earth. It was a very magnificent little trick that they pulled. And interesting enough, this guy, Kevin McCairn, one of the wonderful themes that this guy has in his work is that he promotes India. His whole intro for the first 3 years had this Indian guy and Indian symbols and Indian elephants. And this guy saying, I'll have no vaccines in my blah, blah, blah. India. It's almost like his wife isn't Pakistani and Japanese. Maybe she's Indian. It's all scripted bullshit, and this is a scripted bullshitter that came to my house and is now streaming with Steve Kirsch and Robert Malone and Peter McCullough and that Holshner guy and Kevin McKernan of the Human Genome Project, who was just recently on Cheryl Atkinson. Isn't that nice? Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be back in a second. We're going to do a little musical interlude here. This is Dave Grisman and his quintet. I don't know if you're familiar with them or not, but you soon will be.
Well, didn't Dr. Gallo do that? I mean, he actually isolated it. So, I mean, why should I do all of this? This is all textbook stuff you're asking me.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Gigaohm Biological High Resistance Low Noise Information Brief brought to you by a biologist. My name's Jonathan Cooey, coming to you live from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I got about 20 minutes to crank this out really quick. I just wanted to do a quick revisit of my friend Brett Weinstein, just to let you know where he is. Remember, the whole posit here is that we're moving to a place now where Robert Malone is going to be introduced to more Americans, people that have never met him before, people that don't know who he is, and he's going to play an intermediary role between the extreme positions of RFK Jr. and his pseudo-vaccine skepticism that Paul Offit has so ineffectively opposed for the last 15 years, and the sort of mainstream, widespread acceptance that intramuscular injection of any combination of substances is always a good idea. And if you like what you see, you like what you hear, you think this needs to happen more often and longer with more detail and in more forms, then please go to gigaohmbiological.com, and try to find a way to support the stream. And if you want to get notified, there's an email address there. And if you want to share the stream, please download it or encourage other people to download it before they watch it from stream.gigaohm.bio. Then they will have no interruptions, no tracking. They can even unplug their internet and watch the video. So I'm not suggesting that anybody join YouTube or Rumble or any of that other shit. I'm really saying go to gigaohmbiological.com, download it, watch it, and delete it. Ladies and gentlemen, what a long, strange trip it has been. I keep thinking that it's going to get better or that something's going to fix, but it's not. It really does seem like it's only Mark and I. So I'm going to switch over to this. I'm just going to listen to the first few minutes after the ads because
at least one of two things
it's so
Existence of the show.
interesting where they
what
are.
I had thought was an error last week's episode will not function, and the plumbing pipe is
it is later.
It is later now.
Yeah, but I really think that
then
this
we'll be done. It's only a little minute, but I want to make a couple points.
Hair and skin is marvelous, but what is landing in your lungs is very important. So, Jolie will give you the best skin and hair guaranteed. Head to jolieskinco.com/dark.
So they all have sponsors. They're all being supported by Rumble and by all these other sources of income that don't make any sense.
It's a biblical thing. Yeah. All right. Head to Jolie Skin.
And, they all have to do plugs. If you look at Kim Iverson, if you look at all of them, they all do plugs. They're all selling shit. They're all performing monkeys. They're all not putting anything on the line at this point. None of them have lost anything. None of them have risked anything. Most of them have progressed nicely to an independent profession of whatever they call this shit that they do.
Ultra stores, get yours today.
No, that's a different Jolie.
All right.
You wanted to start.
I want to start with, I'm not even sure it's a correction in this case. To be honest, I've talked to a number of people and nobody is entirely clear on what has happened. But those of you who watched last week's episode will remember.
Now remember that I don't think that very many people give a shit who Brett Weinstein is, and there are quite a few people on Earth who know that he's full of shit. But he has been very effective at wrangling cats on the pseudo-conservative side of the narrative, wrangling cats on the lab leak side of the narrative, and wrangling cats on the pseudo-patriots that used to be Democrats but have now come to realize that maybe we should be behind Donald Trump. Also, a multiple shooter expert, also a fuel shortage expert, also a expert on political policy and on AI, and his wife is equally a polymath. So let's just listen to their very deep insight into this situation, knowing now what we know a couple weeks later, this is a couple weeks old. And I want you to see how ridiculous it is what he says in light of all of the programming that we've done to show you how awful these people at the top of the FDA are and how malevolent it is that somebody like Vinayak Prasad is pretending to be an American director of the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research under Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And that this is okay.
That I took Vinay Prasad to task over his announcement that the COVID vaccines were going to be not recommended except for those who were vulnerable. And what Vinay did not say, but was easily inferred from the list of vulnerable people, was that pregnant women were still included on the list because they were considered vulnerable, and therefore it was argued that they would benefit from the shot, which they clearly won't. So we had that discussion, and I said some colorful things about Vinay having negotiated with the devil. And then an announcement came out later that reflected a different policy. So do you want to play that clip from Kennedy? And
so he claims that his critique, taking Prasad to task, caused them to message differently.
Stop lying!
I mean, seriously, this guy has an ego the size of a hot air balloon.
Bhattacharya and McCary.
Hi, everybody. I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., your HHS secretary, and I'm here today with
Foreign passport. Sorry, but it's true. Foreign passport to the UK, foreign passport to India. And this is a globalist puppet right here, this guy in the middle. This is a Trojan horse dude that they knew was dumb enough to put a bear and a bicycle in the park and pretend that it was an accident. He's been addicted to multiple drugs in his life and needed rehab multiple times. You know, women die all around him, like his wife and Brandy Vaughn and Tony Bark. It's just weird.
NIH Director Dr. Jay Bhattacharya and FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty McCary.
And he's a climate crazy.
I couldn't be more pleased to announce that as of today, the COVID vaccine for healthy children and healthy pregnant women.
Can you imagine how I would look in that picture, given how much taller than I am than him? Have you seen the pictures with me and Bobby? Imagine me and Marty in the same picture. You'd have to have a wide angle lens, like a 16 millimeter or something like that.
Has been removed from the CDC recommended immunization schedule. Last year, the Biden administration urged healthy children to get yet another COVID shot despite the lack of any clinical data to support the repeat booster strategy in children.
That ends today. It's common sense and it's good science.
There's no evidence healthy kids need it today, and most countries have stopped recommending it for children.
We're now one step closer to realizing President Trump's promise to make America healthy again.
How long did they work on that? How many takes was it? Did they have somebody write it? Was there a staff of people that chose the camera, the background, the lighting? This is not normal, ladies and gentlemen. This is definitely not normal. And what this will do is create the false illusion of potential shortage, which might drive a lot of Americans on the other side of this perspective to go to their doctor and ask if they need to get a booster before the boosters aren't covered anymore or before the boosters aren't available anymore. What do you think I should do, doc? And so while on our side it's being portrayed as a ballsy move or something like that, listen to how Brett Weinstein and Heather Haying stumble their way through the dark and hit their head on ceiling beams because they're so inept at exploring this space intellectually, like in an honest way. They are clueless. And that makes them traitors and it makes them frauds.
Produced by the...
All right. I find that video a little bit hard to watch. It's very stilted, and these guys are, of course, working incredibly hard. So I will try to ignore the video and just point out that, okay, this is progress. They are not going to be recommending these COVID shots for healthy pregnant women, at least. So things are better.
The thing about it is that having those three jackasses up there basically gives every left-leaning, mainstream narrative accepting doctor to have a really good excuse to ignore them. Because it's Bobby Kennedy who did it. And so as effective as people are saying this is on our side, the other side can just effectively ignore it because it's the dipshit Bobby Kennedy.
Better than we had expected. It's not clear whether this is a change in policy from what Vinay announced, or if this was always the policy trajectory and we were just sort of getting there in stages. But
Vinay has only questioned the application of repeat boosters. Vinay has not questioned the original series. Let's make that very clear right now, and let's see if Brett can ever get there, or if he's going to obfuscate it with his own style of using too many words to say something in order to make sure that nobody really knows what he's saying at all. This guy is a magnificent fraud. And he's one of the worst Americans alive.
In any case, it was sufficiently correct in its directionality that I had Jen pull down the clips that we had put out describing what I had thought was an error by Vinay Prasad. So if I have erred, I apologize to Vinay. We are now in an interesting middle ground where we are apparently not going to have these shots recommended for healthy people. That's a huge step in the right direction.
It raises the obvious question of what they mean by...
That's not true. We're not recommending boosters anymore, you shithead. Is he really that inept? It's not that they're not recommending the original series. Is he really that inept? Or is he reading a script that screws over America? Just decide. It's either way. It's either way. It's terrible. I would actually prefer that he was on a script so that he wasn't just a moron. Because if in reality all the adults in the room are morons, then we have a real problem. Because the realization then becomes that it's not an illusion created by social media. It's just that the vast majority of Americans are not equipped. And that would be terrifying because that would probably mean that the vast majority of people on Earth aren't equipped. That means even the really intelligent population of the Netherlands is never going to think their way out of the social media trap. Just like the very intelligent population of the Czech Republic is probably walking into the same social media trap. The Norwegian population already trapped in the social media trap. And our social media trap just includes a lot of liars that are being thrown out into the world and used against them as well. And there are some international players in this theater that have been recruited specifically because Americans are bamboozled by accents and slow, deep voices, I guess.
Healthy. Who is defining healthy, and who gets to decide whether or not you meet those standards before you do or do not have these shots recommended to you. Obviously, we know that many of the people who have been effectively driving health policy in this country are not interested in human health, else they are worst at their jobs of anyone in human history. But even more narrowly, healthy pregnant women. We have a long history of medicalizing pregnancy. Childbirth is risky for humans, more so than for our closest relatives, because we have such long pregnancies with such large-headed children. But having had 2 successful pregnancies myself, I know for sure that many variations that simply exist during the time period of a pregnancy can be called into question as indicative of something going awry. And I'm concerned that where the bodies are buried here is what defines healthy and who gets to tell you you are or you are not.
I agree that there is concern there. And then maybe even more to the point, the last thing that you should do is give these shots to people who are vulnerable, because it's not going to make it better. It's going to make it worse. It's going to make them more likely to contract COVID, the range of adverse events.
So COVID exists, it can be contracted, it's endemic and in circulation, and we can test for it, and we can sequence it, and people still get it and can be prevented. Do you see? This is 2025. The guy who promoted Robert Malone in 2021, he is in place with more followers than ever with his dumbass wife, and they are ready to tell more of the world about how Robert Malone has always been a hero. They are ready to promote and to be the bridge. And all of these people are in place and ready to go. They've been rehearsing for 5 years.
Is through the roof, which is something we've talked about, and there's a conversation that we should have down the road. But nonetheless, I will say, behind the scenes in the medical freedom movement, there is...
One of the things that has come very clear to me that I want to tell you about now is the idea of what social media actually allows to occur. And it just occurred right there. Because you're listening to 2 people, and this guy says the health freedom movement, he has effectively conjured something out of thin air that it doesn't exist. There's no health freedom movement. Anybody got a card? Anybody got a badge that says, I'm officer so-and-so of the health freedom movement? Who's the CEO or the director of the health freedom movement? Is there a chairman? I heard there's an advisor of the Make America Healthy Again movement. The MAHA movement has a health advisor. The MAHA movement is being run by Del Bigtree and producing videos. And Hasim Malhotra, who was on stage in January of 2023 with Sasha Latipova, the mother of Soph, Meryl Nass, Robert Malone, Hasim Malhotra, and Mike Palmer of the shitty group called Doctors for COVID Ethics, all on stage together telling us it's a psyop that we'll never figure it out. Sasha Latipova, that Mary Holland promotes as somebody who knows that this is a global military exercise and that all of these things happened were global. No, they weren't. They were in Scotland and they were in America and few other places where they really murdered people. And the fact of the matter is, nobody in the UK is pointing to Scotland as a particularly bad example, even though it is. It's an awful example of how this was done, just like America could be an awful example if any of these traitors cared. But they are being paid by the Elon Musks and the Peter Thiels and the George Soroses and all of the other cooperating people.
There's confusion about what's going on. On the one hand, we have seen steps that move.
Even saying that there is confusion is conjuring it. Confusion is very easy to clear up. You use very succinct sentences, very clear ideas, and you explain it very well, and the confusion disappears. That's what I've been trying to do for 5 years about autoimmunity, about natural immunity, about RNA viruses. And the more I learned, the more I had to teach, and the more humble I became because I realized how awfully assumptive I was in 2020 because of all these people telling me that I was on the right track, that I was a hero, that I was so smart, until I said that the diffuse proposal was a lie, and then our life went off the rails.
Move in the right direction, which are tremendous. I mean, the idea that these are not going to be given to children as a routine vaccination during wellness checkups, that's absolutely huge.
Yep.
You know, parents were going to allow it because some doctor was going to look them in the eye and tell them this is the right thing to do for your child.
But he's woefully unaware of the fact that if Robert F. Kennedy does it, that most doctors will have a professional justification for ignoring it. Maybe they'll even pay for the shots themselves. This guy can't be that stupid, but I assure you the script can be that malevolent.
Kids were going to be maimed, kids were going to die, lives were going to be shortened. It was an abomination. And
remember, because they rolled out so much placebo, it wasn't an abomination. It wasn't an abomination. Lots of people I know took a transfection or two and are still alive and still wondering if my prediction about them probably being sicker afterward than before is going to come true. And the only reason why it ain't coming true is because they rolled out a lot of placebos to make it impossible for them to get caught. And these two dipshits actually think that's an impossible plan, that it would never work, that giving out placebos, they would give away their plan immediately. Everybody could detect that. That is actually what Heather Haying thinks and said this week. So I assure you, the people who are giving them their script are listening to my program. Every single second of it.
Have that disappear, that's great. To have the recommendation for healthy people get these things disappear, that's great too. This has profound implications for liability. There are two things that are giving the manufacturers of these shots immunity from liability. One of them is the existence of the shots on the childhood schedule, which strangely provides immunity protection or liability protection for the adult shots. That's now gone. The second thing is the PrEP Act, which causes the emergency authorized vaccines to be covered from liability. But maybe that's on the list of things that's going to get removed.
And yes, that's what's going to happen. So Aaron Siri and other monkeys with a script are now telling us that we need to help the vaccine injured by moving the COVID vaccine off and out from under the PrEP Act, where it is served by the CICP, and instead put it under the Vaccine Act, where it would be served by the VICP. And they're not going to tell you the reason, but Ray Flores will. Lawyers can't work for free. We can't fight for people unless we get paid. And the best way that a lawyer can get paid is to work on a vaccine injury case at the VICP, because the VICP Kangaroo Administrative Court pays for interim fees. Unlike anywhere else in the United States legal system, where a lawyer would only get paid after he wins or after she wins, the VICP is a very unique economic opportunity for lawyers to make fees as they go, maybe even perpetually make fees in cases that they know they can't win. And so, of course, Aaron Siri has a genuine, real conflict of interest explaining that to you because he uses it and has used it for so long. And so they'll put Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Mary Holland and Robert Malone in front of you, and even Brett the dipshit Weinstein and his wife, to tell you that moving the COVID shot off of the PrEP Act and onto the regular VICP is progress and justice.
Stop lying! Stop lying!
That's their plan. That's what's coming. And Robert Malone and Bobby Kennedy will the people that tell you the story. This guy will give you the play-by-play. Chris Martinson or the Rubin Report or Shannon Joy and all these other dipshits will play along and cheer and scream from the sideline. But that's the direction we're going, because the next generation of mRNA is already approved and will remain approved, because this was always about the Human Genome Project. And it's either a collaborative effort between the United States security state and the Indian security state, or Robert Malone is a two-faced double agent who's selling America out to the Indians. You decide.
Which would put us in a whole new position.
You decide. Because Mary Holland's commitment to these lies is all that's required. And when you listen to her laugh about how she had natural immunity so she could travel because she used ivermectin for a couple days and then laughs about it, you really, really, really should want revenge.
Or behind, proper testing.
You should want
or
justice
behind
for
the
her.
6-foot distancing, the 2-meter distancing, or behind these shots, right? This technology that had never been used widely.
Columbia
None
professor.
Of that, is over. And as
3 years
Sasha
in
Latifah
Russia.
pointed out this morning, these
probably
were military
XXY.
operations, but they were global military operations.
She's probably
right?
a Kleinfelter.
Every country had exactly the same narrative. I was fortunate to be able to travel during COVID because I had natural immunity, having had it for 2 days. I took ivermectin. I was fine. And so I saw, 2 meters, masks, be afraid, stay at home, locked down, schools closed, businesses tanked. All of that was on a global basis.
That is a traitor to American grandkids and to the people that were murdered in 2020 and 2021 and 2022, which means that she's a traitor to my friend Nathan. She's a traitor to my friend Annie, a traitor to my father-in-law, a traitor to my sister-in-law, a traitor to everybody that you know that died in 2020 and 2021 that went to a hospital and died. Just like Jessica Rose is, just like Denny Rancor is, just like Meryl Nass is, just like all of these people are. Trump didn't submit a budget. See through it. Come on. This is so dumb. This is so ridiculous. It's frustrating to have to point it out so often. It's frustrating, but I'm not going to stop. You can download this progress report from McKinsey Global Institute off of my website and see what's left over, what mess they have now. It was sculpted using murder and lies, ladies and gentlemen. An anticipated rise in all-cause mortality was sculpted using murder and lies. We have a damn list. And you only need to use a couple of these on this list to do most of the math anyway. And the most significant math that is necessary to be done is by the opioid deaths and figuring them into the equation so that this illusion disappears. The illusion of a falling expected life expectancy in America disappears. And that is one of the illusions that none other than Jayanta Bhattacharya, a supposed friend of mine, is exclusively sustaining on podcasts and interviews around the United States and world right now. He's blaming the novel virus for it, and he's part of this elaborate theater. They're using social media against us, so we're going to have to create our own. That's why I have a peer tube and a soapbox, and you should too. I don't mean mine. I mean you should create your own. I think eventually Housatonic ITS needs to have its own peer tube, and so does Joe Marshall, so that we can all link our peer tubes together, and there'll just be a remote channel on my channel. Ladies and gentlemen, these people were put in place to sustain a very simple narrative, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. I'm not going to show any of those people ever again, I don't think. I think I'm done with them. I think this was the last time that you're going to see a lot of those slides with those people in it, because I just think I've done my job. I've managed to score that goal, and there's no more reason for me to promote them anymore. So thank you for having so much patience with me. Don't forget that you can't use PCR. It just doesn't work like that. It's not a high fidelity measurement, and neither is sequencing with 105 primer pairs. These are all illusions that are sustained by a bad biology. that I will now start to teach regularly on this stream. Ladies and gentlemen, RNA cannot pandemic. Intramuscular injection is dumb. Transfecting healthy people will remain a crime, and population pyramids are real, and you can learn an awful lot about how they pulled this off if you can find a population pyramid from before the pandemic. I love you all very much. Good to see you. One more day this week. Boy, it's been tiring this week. I don't know what to tell you.
The one thing
I'm doing okay though.
Is that this
Thank you very
RNA
much.
exists. You can
And
capture it,
I'm
you
not
can
stopping.
sequence it, you can move it to other cells and recapitulate disease.
Not gonna stop. Not gonna stop. No. Actually, a population pyramid should look like a pyramid. It should have more kids than old people, and it should be kind of smooth from the bottom of the top. Just so you know. Look at India's population pyramid and you'll figure it out.
But you can tell if someone's lying. You can sort of feel it in people. And I have lied. I'm sure I'll lie again. I don't want to lie. I don't think I'm a liar. I try not to be a liar. I don't want to be a liar. I think it's really important not to be a liar.